First of all, it's just very much humbling and an honour to be here today with you back at home. Don't often get the chance to be here. But particularly important for me is, yes, Dad has gone first in setting off this Whanau series, but also to acknowledge the fact that it is really important that whānau speak before an organisation like ours. Okay, so ready to rock. What do we mean by ready to rock in Te Pou Matakana? Well, I'm going to talk about three things today. One is, I'm going to give you context of the lay of the land. What does it mean when you're commissioning for outcomes agency? The next thing I'm going to do a little bit about the big picture thinking. And the third thing, I'm just going to give you a little bit of roadmap of what we mean about commissioning for outcomes and how we do commissioning in action. And then Brad is actually going to the detail about how do we measure, how do we implement outcomes, how does that make sense to our whānau on the ground. So when we talk about the lay of the land, you're probably going to think about, okay, she's going to do the next slide on, let's hear about Te Pou Matakana, its role and purpose and so forth. Well, really, I'm going to start with this. It's actually called Navigating the Grey, Te Pou Matakana. There is no black and white. What do I mean by that? Te Pou Matakana is a commissioning agency, and just to set a context, it's one of three commissioning agencies in New Zealand. It came under Te Puni Kōkiri, of which Te Pou Matakana looks at commissioning for whānau order outcomes across the North Island. It is each of the three commissioning agencies takes quite a different approach to looking at whānau order, and it's very much wrapped around what their own communities are saying. For Te Pou Matakana, we spent quite a bit of time looking at what is missing here. To date, when we talk to our providers, we talk to our whānau on the ground, they have lots of services given to them. They have lots of funders when we talk to providers, asking them for outputs, asking them for volumes. But what was missing in every piece of data we looked at is no one was looking at what is the change that's actually happening in behaviour for our whānau on the ground. At what point do our whānau become first? At what point do our providers turn around and say, well, what would you like? How do we then as providers wrap around and change what we deliver to best suit your needs? Then the next question that sits behind that is, what outcomes do we measure to make sure those changes are actually happening for whānau? So to date, and it's just an evolution of our thinking as we look to a more client-centred approach, patient-centred approach, and some terminology for us, whānau-centred approach, is we've moved from a funder-centric view of looking at what funders need to collect to probably in the last 8 years we've looked at a provider-centric view about what services providers provide, making sure they meet their contracts, to us in Te Pou Matakana taking a big leap forward to saying what do whānau want to do? What do we measure for whānau? And that underpins our whole modus operandi in Te Pou Matakana. So a little bit about that. Outcomes are at the heart of commissioning. There's 100 different words and jargon for outcomes, but really in the simplest form, what are we here to do? And a lot of us know that on the ground, particularly as kaimahi, is we're about measuring the change in the behaviour of the whānau. Not measuring the change in how efficient our systems are, but measuring the actual change of behaviour. Because time and time again, when we look at our whānau and when they come in the doors, they've had myriads of programs thrown at them over the years. But have they actually been able to move out of the crisis mode? Have they actually been able to take a step as a family and now able to avert crisis themselves? When they avert crisis, have we actually measured the change for that family so they become stable? They no longer need the intensity of services to wrap around them in the crisis stage. So what leadership programs are we putting in place? What whānau leadership programs are we putting in place, not for individuals, but for whole families to be able to navigate for themselves, for their own mokopono, their own next 2 or 3 generations? Once you get families to that stage, the next stage is those families who are flourishing, who are able to lead for the next 2 or 3 generations, when do they step up and become the leaders in their own communities, how they define the communities? So that organisations such as Te Tihi and other of our whānau order partners are able to take more and more a back step from being at the front end of supporting our communities come to the front. Now those are the significant, powerful changes in behaviours from a whānau-centric point of view we must be looking at measuring over time. Because if we're going to make any change to our programs, we have a plethora of programs, but are we actually supporting these families to go through to measure the significant change? For us, over time, that is really what we want to measure in whānau order. That's a long roadmap, that's a dream almost, but there are steps and milestones that we can do on the way to achieving that. So if we're looking at that thinking underpinning Te Pou Matakana, we're looking at outcomes, but we're looking at outcomes that organisations do specifically with their own whānau. It's not about Te Pou Matakana dictating what the programs will be. It's about kaimahi working closely with whānau on the ground to say what outcomes whānau want and what should wrap around them. Te Pou Matakana's role is to monitor and manage and see what information is coming out from whānau being able to achieve those outcomes. And I'm going to explain that a little bit more in detail shortly. But in Te Pou Matakana, and I'll show you on the next slide, we have a whole range of whānau ora partners now that work with us across the North Island. The most significant thing is that we're able to scale up. We're able to now to start to measure the changes that are happening with whānau within a particular area and measure up all the outcomes, immediate, short and medium term, across the whole of North Island with our whānau ora partners. The most exciting thing is that we're actually starting to develop, if you like, our own transactional data, not national data sets, but truly whānau-centric data sets of the changes that have happened for them on the ground and start to see what's happening with our families across the North Island. So that's what we talk about. We talk about outcomes at whānau and population level. So what we're doing also, it is new, it's a very different way of working, is that we're looking up and out to the future to see potential game changers. We actually look to our whānau ora partners to identify what programs they want to do, to think of ways that they do it themselves. Traditionally, they've always had a very set service specification, contracts and how to do things. But our kaimahi know on the ground what to do with whānau. They're best to do it with them. It's not for us to dictate and overrule that relationship. It's for how do we support them to make sure they provide solutions that they know will best meet the needs of whānau on the ground. As I said before, we have a range of whānau ora partners, and what we can see is where things work well with different whānau ora partners, we can share best practice over time, but we now have a capacity to scale up what works well. So then we can start to talk about transformative scale. So the things that underpin Te Pou Matakana are innovation. We're about a permissive approach as opposed to a prescriptive approach. We're also about agility. Those are three important values, if you like, if you're going to look at a whānau-centric or a truly client-centric approach to achieving outcomes and well-being. It is a leading-edge New Zealand government commissioning agency model, and it is becoming a model of international best practice. Our CEO recently spoke at Atlanta, Georgia last week, the week before, on an international social value measuring conference. And Te Pou Matakana has been put up as an example of an international best practice in commissioning for outcomes. Recently, Bill English has been with Te Pou Matakana, and it is the only government agency in New Zealand that's taking a truly outcomes focus for patients, clients and whānau on the ground. And while it's specifically in the whānau ora space, it's now starting to be having other researchers sit alongside it to look at how this commissioning model really helps support the true backbone of building strong communities in New Zealand and keeping them going forward. Outcomes must be sustained by whānau. The underlying principles Te Pou Matakana does when working with whānau ora partners is that we design with them, we produce with them, and that underpins the most important thing is that kaimahi on the ground must design with their own whānau, must produce with their own whānau. If the whānau are really going to embrace the ownership of change process and believe in these and take them forward for themselves. So what does it mean when we have a whānau ora partner? We're about like-minded thinkers and doers, supporting our partners to co-design, co-produce and measure the outcomes achieved. But it's a really big thing because our partners have to be adaptable, continuous change and movers and shakers. So this is why I call it navigating the grey, because this is brand new. No one's written the textbook on this. In fact, when we all started, and I think, hey, our kaimahi here probably burnt out from hearing this all over, we're constantly writing the textbook as we go. We're constantly operating in the grey because we operate at the end of the continuum where this is all brand new. No one has written the model for this. No one has written the textbook for this. But in our kaimahi and our organisation's heart and souls, they know exactly what needs to happen on the ground. So what it is we've spent a long time trying to change the thinking from a funder point of view about how we meet the contract deliverables for a funder to these are the services we provide and these are our contracts, to totally changing that, taking the shackles away and letting our whānau ora partners design on the ground programs, different ways of looking, different assessment tools that truly measure the change in behaviour for whānau. So it's quite a, if you like, the whānau ora partners that work with us are like-minded. If you often heard that word adaptable and agile organisations, adaptable leadership, that is absolutely key. If you get some providers who like the same process, know exactly how the textbook rules, very much into managing risk, keeping everything the same, it's probably not the best partner in this space. You have to have CEOs with a commitment to constantly changing, constantly refining, constantly looking at doing things differently, constantly learning off our mistakes, off our failures, and building from that. So it's a different type of an organisation that we work with, and we accept that not all of our mighty providers want to be in this space too, and that's okay. So adaptability, continuous change, movers and shakers underpins what's needed for a whānau water partner. The big picture thinking. Okay, as I said before, we're writing the textbook as we go. There's a lot of rub outs. Actually, there's a lot of ripping out pages, but anyway, that's all part of being in this new sector. I'm going to talk a little bit about the bigger picture strategy for us. 3 things are really important for us, and we've spent a lot of time on this, which Brad is actually going to operationalise. We spent quite a lot of time, as a number of other organisations have done, designing an outcomes framework. That's a whānau-centric outcomes framework. Not only that, we've spent quite a bit of time looking at indicators, high-level indicators that support that framework, that are able to actually map the outcomes that are measured on the ground by our whānau water partners up to the bigger picture of what we're saying with our population as a whole across the North Island. The most exciting thing now, Te Poumatakana has only been going for 2 years. So we're only very much at the early stage of looking at this whole process. I don't want to look at the kaimahi now because it's a constant heartache at the moment of redesigning our outcome indicators, what we're measuring, how we're reporting on it, because we're designing as we go. But the thing is, we've got really good partners at the end of the day who understand we are designing as we go. And that's a really cool thing about our whānau water partners. They're actually leading a whole new way of measuring. But we have to constantly refine it and change it to meet the needs of our organisation. But I'm going to talk about the government agencies as well, who do have a role in this, but still not lose what the focus is about measuring the change on the ground for whānau. So the exciting thing is we're now starting to collect data on outcomes being achieved, particularly immediate outcomes, which has taken 2 years to get to this point for our whānau. But for the first time we have, as I said before, national data sets of information. We're collecting a brand new whānau-centric data set of outcomes being achieved by whānau across the whole of the North Island with our partners on the outcomes being achieved for them immediately. So when you're developing that data set and then also able to benchmark against national data sets, you really are on a really good point to look at how we're progressing and to benchmark our progression. But one of the biggest things also that we're really stuck on, as a lot of you already are, is storytelling. The best storytelling are when whānau author their own stories. So important to us, as well as reporting, scorecards and so forth, is actually getting the videos, actually getting the stories whānau, actually documenting the change for them as they go through their different journeys, which is just important if we're going to put the passion into the data. The other thing I'm going to talk about is that we have 2 key logic models that underpin our whole thinking. Brad is going to talk about one, our outcomes logic model, and I do want to talk about, I know there's some funders here to talk about our organisational logic model that underpins the way we think in Te Poumatakana, which I'll come to. So this is called Te Poumatakana's organisational logic model. So who are our participants? They're whānau in the North Island. They contracted whānau water partners in the North Island, and we have community and other whānau water partners, including funders and service providers. Our activities, and I'm going into the details of these, we have 3 significant programs. One's called Whanau Direct, which is about meeting the immediate term outcomes of whānau. One's called Kaiarahi, which I really want to spend some time on shortly, because it's the essence and soul of truly making the transformation for whānau. And it's about navigating whānau through services, but not only that, as I said before, navigating whānau through shifts, through crisis, to averting crisis, to stability, resilience and leadership. It's like a life coach. If you don't have that connection with whānau that they can believe in and keep on measuring their change over time, you may as well go back to the beginning. Kauri have one of the most important roles in the well-being of our whānau and how we work in whānau order. The next one is collective impact, and I see a number of agencies here that are no doubt part of your collective impact initiative, which is the next program. We also have, I'm going to touch on a lot of research going on behind the scenes about the different type of investment programs we want to look at in the future, as well as we have advocacy and co-investment programs. I think John is coming to speak to you in a couple of weeks, and no doubt he will explain to you, hey, you can read all about it anyway to understand his role in advocacy, but he'll talk about that. We have co-investment model as well, which I'm going to talk about. Next is about our outcomes. Basically, at the end of the day, we have 3 broad areas that each of those areas feed into. But as some of you are maybe well knowledgeable on this now, our big picture domains are whānau being knowledgeable, our whānau health, whānau participation in the community, whānau engaged in te ao Māori, whānau standards of living, and whānau relationships. So those are massive broad outcome domains that all our outcomes, which are multi-layered, start to feed and look at how we're achieving for each whānau over time. And then the impact we make. So as a result of Te Poumatakana commissioning activities, whānau in the North Island will enjoy good health, experience economic well-being, knowledgeable, well-informed, culturally secure, resilient, self-managing, and able to participate fully in te ao Māori and the wider society. Okay, well, do outcomes matter? As the quote says, brilliant surgery, well done, shame the patient died. Okay, we all understand that. We all have that quality controller in our organisation and focus on that bit. So for us, that probably puts an essence about where our priority is. That speaks for itself. I'm not going to get into that, but what I want to talk about is our programs. It was very easy when we first started as a commissioning agency to say, look, we see a gap here, we see a gap here. This isn't being met in the health service. This isn't being met in social services. This isn't being met in justice. But that was very much a gap approach. That was very much a deficit approach. Te Poumatakana, what underpins Te Poumatakana is aspirational outcomes. What whānau want to achieve. We know too much where the deficits are. We know too much where the gaps are. That's not what it's about. Where are they at now, and how can we take them on the next step of the journey towards the light at the end of the tunnel for them? So it's very much about a different focus, which is our investment program. So we have 3 programs, Whanau Direct. Whanau Direct is our immediate term program, where whānau have a moment of need. There's a very robust process put play. They go directly to our whānau order partners and are able to get a grant of up to $1,000 to help that. It's not a one-off grant. It's not something that sits by itself. It sits in a whole whānau order plan for that whānau. Okay. So it's Kaiara have a very important role to identify what that moment of need. Now, a moment of need could be crisis, but just as much, a moment of need may not be crisis. A moment of need, every whānau is not the same. Some whānau might be they're out of that crisis and they just need something to help with their whānau with te reo, or they might be having something to help them with their business. But the most important thing here is that whānau define what that moment of need is. We don't actually set the rules on that either, because we're about being permissive, we're not about being restrictive. So the difference of this one is that our whānau order partners have all risen into the occasion and have developed their own ways of how they're going to implement that on the ground with their own whānau. They know their own communities best, they know what will work with them. Our kaiarahi know what they need and what they don't need with those whānau. So we're at the point now of 2 years in where we're collecting a lot of immediate term outcomes. Immediate term outcomes for us is 4 months. Now, once again, we didn't want to go and dictate a particular service, a particular program. So we next embarked on, if that's our immediate to short-term outcomes product, what's our medium-term outcomes product? A medium-term outcomes product for us is that we recognise that whānau have multiple needs that are complex. Not one service, not one program, not one organisation is going to be able to achieve that on their own. So somewhere along the line, we have to design an infrastructure where our partners can come together with other like-minded organisation and providers in the area to actually look at how all the services come together, define and agree a particular outcome, and measure the change for that particular population of whānau over time. You won't see the outcomes achieved in year 1. You might start to see some indicators of the change in behaviour of whānau of year 2, but year 3 is when you'll start to see some of those outcomes change. It's a recognition that you don't change your services, you don't do new services, there's not money for new services. It's more about bringing all your services together and wrap it around a defined population or whānau and constantly measure the change in the progress of the family as a result of those wraparound services. So that's a collective impact one. Once again, it's not about being restrictive, it's about being permissive. We also have some co-investment programs. As you know, the Ministry of Health, we're putting through our Whanau water partners, has one in some regions, breast screening and cervical screening programs. This is a new area for us. Some of our government agencies are now giving us money to look at running programs. Another one is with MSD, who have now given us some money to run some youth programs with some of our Whanau water partners in different areas. We have one DHB in one region we're just negotiating with now, who have a pool of Māori health funding, and they're actually looking at giving that for a particular area to Te Pou Matakana. So Te Pou Matakana will take that funding and on their behalf commission for outcomes for that particular area for Māori health. So we see that quite an exciting area, but once again it's a learning journey because our funders have to work with us in quite a different way. So one step at a time. These two funders are coming on the journey. A lot of them have done a lot of work on outcomes. They keep it in an innovative area. They're dipping their toe in because it's a very different way of measuring to what they're used to. But we see this as a really exciting way of going forward. Last thing, nothing is as important as the effect it has on me and my whānau. I'm not a problem to be solved, I'm an individual to be developed. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora koutou katoa.
Talking about our home, land and sea. Talking about our home, land and sea.